Good evening. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Prof.
I'm going to go through very quickly with this slide. We talked on some of the items before, but I just want it to link with what I want to cover today. We remember we talked about ethical issues. Now, when you are using questionnaires, because if you are going to collect data, that is going to require use of questionnaires. Then you think about ethics, issues of consent. I tell your respondents that they have the right to withdraw. Then you think about you having to adhere to confidentiality issues, anonymity, and non-traceability of the issues. That means we said on the questionnaire, people cannot write their names, for example. Or you are not supposed to ask about issues that will make it very clear for other people to recognize who responded to that questionnaire. Then when you report responses from the questionnaires, do not create data. We expect the undergrad to cheat because they still think that we don't know kind of data that was developed from one person. You know, they change ballpoint pens, colors, and everything. They do wonders in order to create data. And yet they don't realize that it is it's much easier to create, to get data from different people than to sit down as an individual and imagine yourself being 20 different people and develop a response. So we expect at master's level and PhD level to have honest reporting. Report what you found. The responses may not be in the line in which we are expecting, but that's what is coming out, and report that. And we remember we talked about the kind of questions you can ask: open-ended questions, closed questions. But when you talk about closed questions, remember we can have dichotomous questions, like questions which give you a type of responses like yes, no, true, false. You talk about multiple choice, they choose, or rating scales from on a scale of 1 to 10, put your opinion, express your extent of agreement, and so on. So these actually allow us to talk about the scales of measurements that we expect people to work with when they analyze data. And so when you use instruments as the scales of measurements, then you think about the type of scales that you can analyze, like a rating scale, where a rater makes a judgment about a characteristic of a subject or a place. Then an attitude scale or a perception scale, which measure aspects of an individual or a group's attitude. That means you ask a series of questions that lead to a certain outcome, like, therefore, can you say these people have a positive perception or have a positive attitude? And we have a scale for that. So when you talk about the scales, rating scales, we think about discrete scales or categories provided representing discrete amounts of some characteristic. So we talk about exceptionally good, above average, or below average, or poor. And so you're actually trying to express in some kind of something that you would be able to quantify. Or you talk about a continuous or graphic scale that raise interval data about an object. So we talk about an uninterrupted line, normally, which you provide from 0 to 10. Can you tick somewhere where along that line where you would feel you belong or your perception belongs? Then think about the attitude scale, like the Likert summated scale, which we normally talk about. We also have the Turnstone equal appearing interval scale, which you can use, the Gartman cumulative scale, or the Osgood semantic differential scale. These are scales that you can decide to use when you are developing instruments or when you are reading data that is coming from those different types of scales. A Likert scale is the simplest. where we talk about the strongly agree or disagree, the disagree, and the strongly disagree. And normally we expand this like you in data analytics. We normally expand this scale so that we convert the responses to quantitative data. So usually we expand this scale to having 7 or 10 ratings. The Thornstone is equal appearing interval scale will have again something like 1 would represent least favorable to something what you are talking about, to 11 or whatever number you think of, where you put it to most favorable. So people will choose where along that scale, how far they would rate that thing. Like I would put it at 10 as the most favorable day of the week, or the most favorable aspect of an activity. The Gartman cumulative scale usually is an example where we talk about social distance scale, is where we talk about least extreme events. Are you willing to permit immigrants to live in your country, for example? Are you willing to permit immigrants to live in your community? So you are starting with a general and you move to specific until you say, are you willing to permit your child to marry an immigrant? Think about it in terms of social distancing. Would you allow people to get into your company who are not tested? Would you allow someone who is not tested in terms of COVID to come, or who has not been vaccinated? Would you allow someone who has not been vaccinated into your company? Would you allow someone who is not been vaccinated into your compound? Would you allow someone to be who has not been vaccinated into your household? Would you allow someone who has not been vaccinated to be in your room? Something like that. So you keep on narrowing until you make people or respondents really think about what they are saying. The Osgood semantic differential scale, again, it talks about issues of where people want to put magnitude of their expectations, like is it sweet, is it bitter, how would you look at it? Is it bright or it's dark? You know, you want people to put somewhere where to tick somewhere where they would give you an impression of what they feel is most suitable to the condition that they are talking about. Again, when you do an observation as a data collection method, you are actually looking at it from a scientific inquiry perspective, where you have to monitor behavioral and non-behavioral activities. If you are doing a qualitative study, then you are visually looking at the facial expressions. You are listening, and the 4 levels of listening when you are doing data collection become very important. Because when you listen, you have to listen to the heart, you listen to the head, you listen to the stomach of the person, you listen to the feet. When you listen to the head, you are listening to the thoughts. You are inferring what that person is thinking, what that person is saying, which is not being said exactly. You listen to the issues of the heart. How is that person feeling when they make those expressions? Listen to the stomach. What are the needs of that person? Are the needs coming out when they talk? What about the feet? What are their intentions? What are their next moves? What are they likely to be doing next from the responses that they are giving? We also get data on observation when we read documents. We can get information, some people say, and document analysis when they explain the method of data collection. Some people will say, we smell. They can smell. They get into a situation and they can use their sense of smell. Some will use their sense of touch. But all these will fall under observation. And when you say, I will collect data using observation, think about all these techniques and see how much you can get. So when you do an analysis of such kind of data, then you have to look at non-verbal analysis expressing fear that person said, with tears that person explained this, but you have to mention the non-verbal issues that you got, the extra linguistic analysis, putting emphasis on whatever, emphatically saying something, and also talk about the spatial analysis that comes out, especially when you collect data from the respondents. Recorded analyses are also something that data analytic students can actually come across, because sometimes we do expect people to collect verbal the verbal records, and you simply analyze that record, especially people who analyze non-verbal data, where you are actually just recording what those people will have written down. Think about the physical condition, think about the physical process analysis. What kind of data will you have collected, and how will you analyze it, therefore? When you collect data using interviews as conversations, an interview is simply a conversation between the researcher and a respondent, and you are using normally an interview schedule or an interview guide to guide you. If it is qualitative research, it's unstructured. If it is both quantitative and qualitative, it can be semi-structured, straightforward, and in the same sequence, or you can vary and you can change the probes. That's semi-structured. If it is structured, the probing questions, the questions themselves are asked in the same sequence on every individual who is being interviewed. That makes it structured. There are some people who think that quantitative analysis or quantitative research does not do interviews. That's a misconception. In a quantitative research, a positivistic research, a scientific research can actually be using a structured interview. Once it's structured, then you are collecting data. You can collect the data in that way. You are actually making it look into a more systematic way, and therefore it becomes quantitative. But when you are doing qualitative research, remember, we talked about probability, non-probability sampling. And normally, you cannot generalize data that you collect using qualitative methods, because the sample that you will have used, usually people say, I will use purposive sampling. That means one of the limitation of your research will be that it is not generalizable. It is just specific to that context. And so qualitative research will tell you just the why, the how, but it's a rich experience. You get a lot of rich data, but that type of data is very time consuming to analyze versus data that is Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Okay. So when we look at qualitative research techniques, what techniques are you going to use when you say I'm going to collect data? When you collect data using qualitative research, we think about a case study. That means you study a small group for intensive investigation usually. And data analytics students usually conduct case studies because you get data from an organization and you look at that data, you analyze that data, you generate models using that data, and that experience is usually a case study. Some will simply look at secondary data and you do secondary data analysis. Some will do experience surveys. Some will do focus group discussions. Focus groups are usually comprising 6 to 12 people. And if you interview such groups, then we say you are doing a focus group discussion. Observation, I've just talked about. Interviews, I've just talked about. Data collection tools. Now, when you collect that kind of data, you have to organize that type of data. And we say once data is being collected, it has to be organized according to either the groups that you are studying or the individuals that you have studied or the issues or themes that will be coming up or the research questions. What did you set out to look for? Or according to the research instruments. What did the question number 1 say? What did question number 2 say? Or according to the cases, they were looking at multiple case analysis. And therefore, you have to organize your data according to the cases. Maybe you collected data from CAT, then you also collected the data from UZ, you also collected the data from Bindura University, you collected the data from Lupane. Therefore, that data which you have collected is organized according to the university that you collected the data. Or you can use chronology to organize that data. So it depends. When you are asked, how are you going to present and analyze your data in chapter 3 usually, we want you to tell us whether you organized your data according to groups or to individuals or to research questions, and you justify why you did that. Each of them has its advantage and it has its own disadvantages. Now, qualitative analysis is subjective because it's based normally on non-quantifiable information. So when you are organizing that data, you are organizing it according to how you collected that data and why you collected that data in that manner. So your analysis now is dependent on the organization that you have done, the organizing process that you have gone through. Then you have to describe that data that you have collected. You have to describe what you collected, what you saw, what you found. Then interpret. You cannot just describe 10% said, 15% said. You have to interpret what does that mean. When you say 5 out of 10, 15 out of 20 people responded. What do you mean? Then you have to discover patterns out of that. Is there a general pattern that is coming out? We say, can you generate themes? Can you generate patterns out of it? Then you have to explain them. And you look at those themes, and normally we are seeking causality. We are seeking an explanation of how those things are happening and why those things are happening that way. So that's why we say in qualitative research, we are more into seeking meaning. We are more into interpreting what those people are saying. And therefore, we need to explain and get clarity of what that data is telling us. We talked about in ethics. When you are dealing with the qualitative data, normally think about the things that we expect you to be careful about. The honest reporting, the objectivity of trying to do it, because remember, qualitative data, you are also involved either as an instrument of data collection, because you are part and parcel of the process of data collection. You may be immersed in the situation that you are studying. When you especially are doing participant observation, you may be analyzing data of your own organization. And therefore, your issues of you being subjective are very clear and they are very pertinent. And you think about integrity, carefulness. That means, are you understanding what that person intended to say? And that's why we say, can you go back and confirm and validate that? Is this what you meant when you said this? And you clarify it. Think about the respect of intellectual property, social responsibility, that you cannot leave a person being discriminated against or being abused because you're just a researcher. You have to respond and protect that respondent. Think about non-discrimination when you do a sampling, something like that. And when you say objectivity, we are assuming that a truth or any independent reality exists outside your investigation. Your task, therefore, in this model is to uncover this reality without contaminating that reality. Just to say what you are finding as it is. Reliability is about repeating research findings. Can someone also take that database, data set that you have analyzed and use the same analytic tool that you used and get a similar result or the same result? Reliability is part and parcel of a positivistic scientific thinking, which says if it's something can be repeated, if someone can also repeat it, they must be able to get the same result. And that is more into social, scientific research or quantitative research, where we expect someone to repeat the same experiment and get the same result. So it's just like in chemistry, where you say, if you take this substance and put this substance in, we expect this reaction to take place. Anyone who does the same experiment as many times as they can, they get the same result. And so in chemistry, they say, or in biology, they say, if you put this substance into this substance, you get that result. That's where the repeatability is coming from. Validity, on the other hand, is talking about how well a scientific test or a piece of research actually measures what it sets out to measure, how well it reflects the reality it claims to represent. And that, again, although it comes out of the positivistic scientific tradition, because if something is valid, it has to be reliable. But something, it may be reliable, but not valid. Like a scale in physics, a measurement scale in physics, an instrument, it may be very reliable when it is really having a zero error. So each time that zero error will continue to occur. But that instrument is then said to be very reliable, but not valid because it is a zero error. Therefore, it is not measuring what it is supposed to be measuring. So when we talk about scientific data and qualitative data, we realize because of internet connectivity, my slides coming out very broad because the link I am using now is very so when you report about validity, talk about the internal validity, determining the cause-effect relationships of your data. Talk about the construct validity, how accurately naming measures and manipulations, making accurate inferences about the constructs. Talk about the external generalizability of your study, the external validity, talking about can you generalize that result to other situations. And normally when you do dissertations in the next semester or whatever, you will be asked to talk about its validity and the reliability of your data or your study. Therefore, you have to talk about these types of validity and how you ensured that those validities did occur. Read about this aspect from whatever text that you think about, but then I took this slide from that section. Let me try to make another presentation.
Hi, Prof.
Hello.
There are people in the lobby.
Okay. Mirandi goes up. I was moving the slide forward mainly because the things that it covered, that are covered before that, have been dealt with before. I'm more into looking at the moving towards the data analysis that we are more interested in. And when we talk about the issues of data, we must be able to design or to write out a research question that must show the variables that we are studying, the population that you are studying, and the testability of that question. So your research question must depict these issues because you are going to be dealing with data analysis. We are not worried much about these issues, especially when we are dealing with qualitative research. But when we're going to analyze quantitative data, then we must see the variable, we must see the population that we are talking about, and we must see the testability of that question. In other words, some people will talk about this as a hypothesis. And when you talk about variables in your research, then we expect those variables to have two or more properties or qualities like age, sex, weight, or height. Then we think about having one variable related to another variable and ask yourself, is X related to X or to Y? And what is the effect of X on Y? Something like that. Then we always want to show that kind of a relationship. What kind of a relationship would we expect? So one of those variables has to be an independent variable with a presumed effect on the dependent variable, and it may or may not be manipulated as an independent variable. The dependent variable is that which varies with a change in the independent variable or the outcome variable. And these variables have to be understood when you state your hypothesis. It has to be a statement about the relationship between the two or more variables. So in other words, you convert your research question into a statement that predicts an expected outcome. And the hypothesis is a subset of the research problem, which for our convenience at CAT, we write it, and in most researches anyway, not just at CAT, it becomes a subset of your research questions or research objectives, because you subdivide your research problem into a research objective set, and the set of objectives are in turn converted into research questions. Reason, we do not collect data based on a statement like an aim or an objective. We get data to respond to a question. So we have research questions. Then we respond to them. So we expect you to be able to write hypotheses, declarative statements that identify the predicted relationship or causality between two or more variables. And it has to be testable. It must be very specific and very scientific. It must be based on your literature. You must have read about it. When you express your hypotheses, express them either with a directional or non-directional. We expect you to give us a direction. Is it positive? Is it negative? And when you look at the hypothesis itself, then you say, how do I collect data to respond to that hypothesis? So think about studying a cohort, doing it as a cross-sectional. That means you are just going in like data analytics students who simply take a database, that's cross-sectional. Just pick the data set and study it. Or case control study or clinical trials, whatever you decide to do. But think about it in terms of what you want to present. Then don't worry about that assignment. We don't want you to do that assignment. Don't create a project. We don't want.
Sorry, Prof.
Yes.
Lobby.
Set up in the quantity match.
I'm set my morning.
Yeah. Hurry back. Pane zviri kutoitika pani ngeyake munhu. Let me get another. I took most of this data that I'm going to talk about in this slide from the text of Louis Cohen, Lawrence Mannion, and Kate Mary Morrison. If you get that text, you can get a lot of information from it. That's where I took most of this data from. I'll just rush through. This is what I do in analytics, quantitative methods. But I remember that we have got 4 scales of data: the nominal, the ordinal, the interval, and the ratio. In that hierarchy, the ratio being the most quantitative data, or that we normally come across when we do data analysis. Now, when you do data analysis, for us, think in terms of whether you want to look at parametric tests or to do non-parametric statistics. Parametric statistics, where the characteristics of or the factors in the population are known. If you know the characteristics of the population, Then you can go ahead and do parametric statistics. When you don't know the parametrics or the characteristics or factors in the population that we are dealing with, then we normally do non-parametric statistics. Again, you can think about looking at the statistical analysis, talking about whether it is descriptive or it is inferential. When you say I will use descriptive statistics, you are actually looking at how we describe data. When I say describe your data, using descriptive statistics, in other words, you are saying summarize the key features of that data. Summarize the key features of the sample that you studied. Summarize the simple responses of that sample. In other words, you are doing the frequencies, the correlations, and you are not really making inferences or predictions out of that statistic. But once you start making inferences or predictions, it becomes known as inferential statistics. You are now inferring from the data that you have collected. So you are now looking at data that is based, are now used, for example, to test a hypothesis. Usually, this is the descriptive statistics are given or are done. Normally, if you are at the beginning or when you are really exploring your data, when you are trying to make sense out of your data, so you tend to look at which is the most frequently occurring data, what is the average score, what is the middle score, what is the maximum, what is the minimum, or where is it coming from, and where is it going? The distance between the highest and the best scores. What are the variances? A measure of how far the scores are from the average. You know, the average of the squared deviations of individual scores from the mean. That is what Dr. Makurumidzo would be talking about when he talks about that aspect. Simple statistics talk about the frequencies, the raw scores, and the percentages. Look for fullness, the intensity, the distributions, and the spread. Now, when you are looking at data from your data set and you are looking at frequencies, to explain or to describe your data in terms of how skewed that data is. Is it left, right? Is it negative or positively skewed? Try to explain, is it normally distributed? What are the like? What are the spreads? Think about the mode, the mean, the standard deviation for interval data, for example, so that your data, your description speaks the language of statistics. I should share the screen instead. This is taking time. So talk about the standard deviation, the deviation of the sample means this is how far that data is symmetrical in relation to the normal curve of distribution. Talk about the ketosis, how steep or flat the shape of your graph distribution of data, or how a distribution or how is the slope or the spread of your data around the peak. This needs to be talked about when describing it. We now go to the statistics and talk about correlations. Are there relationships, the variables you are studying? Regression. Think about different testing, like the case things, factor analysis, modeling. That's when you are your model alignment or sort of model alignment. Your frameworks. You are looking at, that is when you'll be looking at more than, but whatever you do, dependent and independent variables, as we had about them. Are you seeing my screen? Hello?
Yes, Prof.
Can you see this screen?
Yes, Prof.
I'm trying to switch on to sharing screen because it seems the coming up of the slides is very slow. So if you can see this screen, then I've talked about inferential statistics. The dependent, independent variables. Now, when you want to do the parametric analysis or inferential statistical analysis, of data that you analyze, then are that data parametric or non-parametric, so that you can do descriptive statistics or inferential statistics. Then you think about if there is dependent or independent variables. Do they need to be identified? Do you have somewhere in your research question, somewhere where you are talking about dependent variables and independent variables? Then are you going to consider the relationships? And if those relationships, are they going to be linear or non-linear? We do that because we need to know we are going to do correlation. When it is, you need to be is it the categories like sex, having male, is because if you talk about data that is no half, you cannot have half a person or half an illness or half a meal time. Is it that is data that is continuous? Think about all those things, because that is what is going to determine whether that data is going to be analyzed inferentially or using simple statistics. Is your data continuous or categorical? Think about this. So when you now go into analysis, first about types of analysis that you can do. Is it you looking for cases within and that's you analyze between two variables. We will not go much into hypothesis about hypothesis at the time. That meant it. If you can be able the data and describe the skews, positively skewed distribution. There are some texts which draw and they say, where is the tail of the fish right? Then it is positively skewed. If the tail of the fish is to your left, then it's negatively skewed. It makes people get to remember the skewness or the descriptions much more easier. Ketosis, as I said, talks about the steepness of the curve. So talk about the shape of the distribution. You know, students, when they bring in patients and they are analyzing, they are describing their data, they tend to just talk about the pie chart. Then we see a bar graph, something that is very monotonous. Then when we talk about data analysis, depending on the kind of data and level of analysis that you are dealing with, I expect you at least to indicate the level of significance that we are using. And normally, GS, business sciences level, they tend to accept, we generally accept, expect people who are dealing with business research, social science research, they are normally allowed a statistical significance of 5%. You know, we our 5 holding 95% of the time. That are allowed to say that 5% of that data has occurred by chance. 9% because we are dealing with human life, but actually dealing with just general relations. So think about correlations, simple correlations like is related to a head size. And if that correlation is 1, then it's a perfect correlation. Is your hand size related to your foot size? Think about that. Correlations, if they are perfect correlations, then we expect a perfect positive line with a gradient of 1. If there is a negative correlation, we expect a perfect negative gradient with a negative -1 gradient. If there is a mixed correlation, then we cannot get a pattern out of it. If there is no correlation at all, then there will be no line of which we can think of drawing. Statistical significance is a function of the coefficient and the sample size. That's what you need to remember. The smaller the sample size, the larger the coefficient, yes, in order to obtain statistical significance. The larger the sample, the smaller the coefficient can be in order to obtain statistical significance. So statistical significance can be attained either by having a large coefficient together with a small sample, or having a small coefficient together with a large sample. These are some of the just statistical facts that we need to remember. And normally when you are looking at correlations, usually we write a null hypothesis. I know in the GBS, when you write your dissertations, they simply say today is monotonous to write H naught every time, because H naught is what statistically we test. So a GBS we are expected to write the alternate hypothesis, that which we are expecting to find. So our task is not to support the hypothesis. The burden of responsibility is not to support the null hypothesis. If our hypothesis is not supported for 95% or 95% of the population, then there is a statistically significant relationship between the size of hands and size of feet, or whatever test you are doing. And these levels are frequently used and demonstrated in many texts. Now, so we say start with a null hypothesis. Then set the level of significance. What are you using? 0.05 or 0.001 or whatever you're using. Then compute your data and determine whether your hypothesis is supported or not supported. And usually we expect you to be very clear and very careful about committing type 1 error and type 2 errors. I want you to read about type 2 error or type 1 errors. We will not ask you about this. That's why I wrote it as library. But I am sure this is required when you deal with your analysis, research methods with those who deal with you on quantitative data. So, ladies and gentlemen, when we do research, we always think about the types of analysis we can do. We always think about the kind of data that we are working with. And so we need to be very clear about the kind of analysis that we must do. Tomorrow, I want to link up chapter 1, chapter 2, and then we go on to complete chapter 3, so that you understand how these things which I've been talking about are interlinked into a dissertation. Then we will then move on to do the actual analysis and the write-up later. Any questions? Because it's 7 o'clock now.
Hi, Prof.
Yes?
I wanted to check from the first presentation, you were talking about the norms that are supposed to be followed up when you are doing research. And one of them was social responsibility. I wanted to check, is it that we may need to pay the people that we are researching from, or how do we link social responsibility? And what's your comment about giving gifts to people whom you are interviewing? Thank you, Prof.
That's a very good question. It's actually a question that I've asked at some point in a exam. Ethical dilemmas. That's very important. You know, we are doing masters. We are students. And remember, when you are collecting data, you are collecting data from the same population or the same sample of people, where, say, an NGO like UNICEF, or I've worked with UNICEF, I've worked with the CARE International, or what was the other group? Yeah, you know, people who deal with the children and rural communities. And last week, I'm just taking a scenario. Let's say last week, I would have gone out to some place in Binga there where we are studying second chance opportunities for school dropouts to come back to school. And I just want a group of young girls who have dropped out of school either due to pregnancy or cultural norms and whatnot. Then I want to interview these people. And for me to get information out of this group, I will have made prior arrangements so that these people travel some more than 5 kilometers to a school where I will be doing my interviews. Then I realized that I'm working for Fawezi for this project as an organization that is very much interested in the girl child. They can't imagine me collecting data from people who have walked 2 and 10 kilometers. So they decide to buy food for these people. And my interview takes about 1.5 hours. After that, we feed them. Next week, you are going to the same group. You are collecting data about school dropouts and you want to do a dissertation. And we have taught you that giving incentives is not really ethical. And you really think about it. Then you go out in Binga to the same group of people, and then you say, I'm going to be having with you interviews. It will just take about 1 hour, and then you finish and say, thank you very much, fathers and mothers and ladies and gentlemen. Will that be clear to you, or will that augur well with that community? No, that means as a researcher, you have to make a judgment. You have made these people travel, and you are going to be with them for this time. Therefore, it's proper to give them a token of appreciation. It's not a bribe. Because ethically, if you collect that data before, if you feed them before you collect data, then we say they are likely to answer the questions in the way they expect you expect answers to come from them. So they will give you what we are expecting because they know you are going to give them a token. And that creates ethical issues or the biases in the data that you collect. So usually you preempt yourself and say, I'm a student. I may not be able to give you as much as what the other people have done, but I'm a student. I'm looking for a certificate. Please respond to my questions, respond to my questionnaires and so on. When you talk to them, be very honest. At the end, when they have responded to your questions, then if you are able to, usually we say if you are able to, then only then can you give them an incentive, a token of appreciation. Normally we say, Waberek, we cannot give you much. I'm just a student. But all I can do is to fund, to try and take part or reduce your energy, travel energy, bus fare, and because of the hunger issues, what I can only partly contribute to your lunch. For those two things. I'm not saying I am paying you for responding to my questions. That's how we put it, because it's a real dilemma. The other issue is we are collecting data. I study children mostly. I get into this community, and there I found that one of the little young boys was being abused by this old granny woman on his way from home to school. That time, we're just introducing AIDS, HIV/AIDS those days, and seeing how sexually active children are. We're actually trying to establish when we could start introducing HIV/AIDS lessons into the school curriculum. So we wanted to see at what stage, at what level children become sexually active. You know what? This little young boy, grade 5, would pass through this old woman's household, and the woman would abuse this child. Here we are just collecting data, baseline data, to introduce a curriculum. And we come across this scenario. At another school, we come across a scenario where the father is actually a worker in that school, and is because he is making sure that he is working where the child he is abusing every day is at school. And because we are collecting data through role plays, through whatever means, because these are children, you get to know this information. What do you do as a researcher? Principles of research will say be indifferent, just collect your data and move. But social responsibility norms will attack you. You have the social responsibility to protect the vulnerable. So it's your role now to go to the head of the school, but not to report the case, but to alert him of the existence of that case, so that they do their own investigation and proceed. It's not your go back to that school as well to say, hey, head, what did you do with that part? Did you do with that case? Otherwise, you get yourself entangled. But as a researcher, try as much as possible to protect that individual. You will come across this kind of data when you do big data analysis, because some of the nitty-gritties of what happens will come out of that data. So you simply notify the responsible authorities and let them do their work. That's how I could answer this. There are quite a number of because some questions which are very difficult to hide the respondent. You know very well that this answer can only come from this person. And especially when that organization says, we are funding your project, we are funding your dissertation, or you are collecting data from us, we expect you to give a report of that dissertation. Or we are funding you to do this research, and you find that whatever is coming out is anti-pro that organization. And you cannot go to that organization and your people are doing nothing. Hey, your people are really doing nothing in this community. What can you do? Can you say that to the people funding your program? And yet they are relying on the funds that come out from this kind of assessments that you do. So these become ethical issues. And this is why we say always strive to be as objective as possible. And in such situations, that when you find a consultant saying, guys, this report that I am producing to you, I'm giving to you as an organization, contains the exact information as I obtained it. The second report that I'll give you is the report that you may then be able to share with your donors, where instead of I say strongly disagreed, I will say face the challenges in explaining what they wanted to say. That's why we say try to be to think of integrity when you do reporting. So that's a very good question. Any other issue?
Thank you, Professor. That was clear.
Okay, I tried to record this session, and it will be part of the that you find when you go under data analytics. You will see on this program. They will come out as recorded session. Don't know those which are already there. They can still be useful to you. So good night. I'm going to stop this lesson. For now, we are meeting when? Day after?
We are meeting tomorrow, Prof. Tomorrow, Monday, and
Tomorrow,
Tuesday.
same time.
Same times, 5:30.
5. Please, class rep, remind me.
Okay, today I couldn't get hold of you, Prof. Your phone was not reachable.
It was even off. It was even something. I was in a workshop.
Okay.
I will look for it. Actually, for that. So I'm ending this lesson.